historian had said about me. Puccini was charmed by her gentle ways, and it is also said that he made changes in his opera Madame Butterfly as a result of her friendship. He called her Chocho-san, the real Madame Butterfly. It's not true. But of course, lots of things have been said about me that confuse and obscure, such is the role of history and biography. The Japanese wrote about me as well. They said, 米国豪華の息子ジョージ・モルガンというが京都滞在中治療のために自殺を企てたるにO-Yukiが驚いて意見を加えついに思いとどまらせたる診断あり。Many things were written about me in my lifetime. Newspaper articles, novels, plays, even a musical. Many things were said, thought. Even in my old age, old news from my youth to become new news again. But now, my story seems to have drifted away. My name forgotten. Newspapers archived, novels out of print. Maybe it is better that way. Now I will tell my own story. Konnichiwa. I was born Yuki Kato. My name Yuki means snowflake. And I was buried as Teresa Yuki Morgan, my baptized name. And I was famously known as Morgan O-Yuki. I was notoriously married to Mr. George Denison Morgan, the nephew of the financier J.P. Morgan, the single most powerful financial figure of his time. Welcome to Ventfort Hall. It was built in 1893 by my husband's parents, Mr. George Hale Morgan and Mrs. Sarah Spencer Morgan. They were cousins. I was 12 at the time, living with my family in Kyoto, attending a school for girls training to be Geisha, called Nyokoba. While I was living, I never saw Ventfort Hall. Have you ever wondered how spirits can haunt homes they don't know or have never occupied? Well, we know we carry forever in our hearts the souls and memories of people in our lives, those we loved, those who loved us, those who disliked us, those who left us behind. Is this what it is to be haunted? Perhaps it is. It is beautiful, isn't it? Just like my... I will confess to you right off, I will live to be 81 years old and I die of consumption. How ironic George was the consumer in life. He only made it to 45. It was a heart attack, they say. His heart and everything it was. My Georgie was the second son. You know how difficult it is to be the second son. One is always vying for attention and trying to find one's place. Junius was the eldest son. He was always Junius this and Junius that. In fact, it was Junius who was said to have had the artistic temperament and made much of the planning and design for Ventfort Hall. Attention. This was something that my husband would struggle with all his life. much need for attention. I came to accept and understand this, but I do not want to get ahead of myself. I was a geisha, the flower and the willow world. This is a phrase for the world of the geisha life. The word geisha means art person. Not like a sculptor or painter, but someone who is skilled in the art of hospitality. Geisha is a highly skilled performer trained in dance, music, tea ceremony, and traditional flower arrangement, ikebana. She entertains an elite clientele. An hour of her time at a tea house is quite costly. But there is another side to this culturally elite woman. The purpose of all this training is to entertain men. Private entertainment does exist, but the geisha is not a common courtesan or usurer. If she does have a patron, then it is only after a lengthy financial agreement with whomever is responsible for the geisha. But when I started my training at age 10, I had no idea what it was to be a geisha. I just did what I was told. I found out what it meant later. While geisha revered in Japan, it is not something a parent wishes for their daughter. A young girl only becomes a geisha if her parents have no other choice. The family needs money. My father was a sword maker for samurai, and this had been a long tradition. But when the samurai class was disbanded and the weapons were outlawed, there was no way for my family to make a living. When a family has decided that their daughter will be a geisha, she's very young, usually between 6 to 10 years old, and it's sold to an ukiya. This is where geisha live. Once a daughter is sold, she may never see her real family again, and instead, the women in ukiya become her new family. However, in ukiya, they don't have love for one another. You are essentially a slave, and only valued once you begin generating an income for the house. But I never had to experience life in ukiya because my family never sold us. I lived with my family until I married. We lived in Kyoto, and the Gion district in Kyoto is the most famous of all the flower towns, Ohama. I started my training at Nyokobo when I was 10. My eldest sister, who was 14 years older, had become a very popular geisha and was making a good income. I started following her and learning her routines. This may have been my training, but I really enjoyed the time with my sister. I watched how she put on makeup, how she chose which kimono to wear for the evening, and how she presented herself for clients. I was trained to be a musician. I played kokyu, the only Japanese instrument to use a bow. Unlike shamisen, which is plucked. All geisha trained to play the shamisen. My sister made the decision that I would also play the kokyu. My life as a geisha control of my sister. No geisha has control of her own life. But my sister was wise, because I could play the kokyu, it set me apart. They even called me Kokyu no O-Yuki. Soon I was known all through a guild. But still, I struggled. I did not belong to an Nokia, and not being adopted by an Nokia has its disadvantages. I would never be a true apprentice geisha or maiko. I would always struggle in the geisha world to be first class. But my sister had achieved success and she set me on a similar path. I made my ceremonial debut. My sister found my Mitsuage patron, the patron who would pay for my innocence. It is an event that must happen in order to become a geisha, and one of the most expensive financial arrangements that is made between a geisha apprentice and a client. Only a few clients are worthy enough and can afford that privilege. A girl does not dream of meeting her Mitsuage patron. A young girl's biggest dream is of finding true love one day, finding a handsome husband who will shower her with fine clothes and jewels. But a geisha is never allowed to have a relationship, only clients. And men do not go to tea houses to find a wife. I was a geisha. I entertained men. I played kokyu. But I dreamed of a husband. I dreamed of living the geisha life. You must understand, in the flower and willow world, you cannot be married and be a geisha. And if you think about it, what businessman wants to pay top dollar to be entertained by another man's wife? So I dreamed. In 1901, I met George Morgan. I was 19. He was 31. He stood out being a Caucasian with his fair hair and mustache and so tall. He was very taken with me. We were told he came from a very prominent and wealthy family in America, but that meant little to me. I was already in love with someone else. Kawakami-san, businessman from Tokyo. When he began to pay attention to me, I fell deep. Kawakami-san. By the time I met George, I had already known Kawakami-san for some time. He was 12 years older than I was. I have always been attracted to older men. Maybe that was because my father died when I was only 13. When I first met Kawakami-san, I liked him instantly. He didn't have a lot of money, so he could never pay for my company at a tea house. 2 years went by. He had switched jobs and started to work for a bank in Osaka. He encouraged his bank to request my presence at a tea house one night. The attraction between us had not faded. After that night, we found ways to see each other. But our relationship had to remain a secret to everyone, my sister especially. It wasn't even a matter of her disapproving, it was just forbidden to have a private romance. Like George, Kawakami-san was a wanderer, but without the wealth to back it. His wandering manifested moving from job to job, city to city. I remember Kawakami-san saying that unless education, he would never be able to get a better job. He wanted a better job so that we could get married. So later than most, when he was in his 30s, he became a college student and studied law. American newspapers would write, "Parents of Kawakami, hearing of his affair with a geisha, had stopped all his allowances and he was in desperate financial straits." While it was true he needed money, it had nothing to do with his parents. He was in financial straits for many years now. And he was in his 30s. His parents had long since stopped supporting him. It was around this time that I met George. George was good-natured and funny, full of life. But he was, strange-looking. 真っ白い肌に天狗みたいな大きな鼻に腕は毛むくじゃらね。A barbarian. His Japanese was limited and his pronunciation was hilarious, but at least he tried and continued to try and actually became quite good at speaking Japanese. He wore a kimono and appreciated our art and culture. I couldn't help but to admire that. But George's clumsy Japanese and words of love through a translator did not stand a chance against Kawakami-san's love. Simply put, George was a foreigner. Japanese women were not attracted to foreigners. Kawakami-san had a way of looking right into my heart. He was my world. I was in love. He was in love. We were in love. And he was in love. Kawakami-san needed money and I wanted to help. At this time, George really took an interest in me. He was requesting my presence at tea houses, and I was earning more money with each of those visits. Money that I'd give Kawakami-san in secret. On many occasions, George would ask to be my patron, my danna. He wanted to continue spending time with me in private. He said he would pay whatever the cost. I always said no. It is a custom to tip a geisha for her time. A good tip, a very, very good tip for a geisha to receive is 1 yen. After dinner George the first time, he handed me an envelope. It contained 20 yen. I was quite taken aback. George would continue to request my company, continue to ask to be my nana. I continued to say no to his persistent proposal, but he would still tip 20 yen. My sister was thrilled. She told me to keep George interested. He brought so much money into our house. This is when I really started to become popular in the flower and widow world. I now had a very, very famous client, the rich American, nephew of J.P. Morgan. From this moment forward, I would never escape infamy while I lived. I was becoming more and more torn between the duty I felt as a geisha to keep my best client and my family happy, and the duty I felt to Kawakami-san and my love to him. Of course, most of my money would go to my sister to manage. I had very little of it that I could spend freely, but I always snuck away as much of it as I could and gave it to Kawakami-san. We had made made a secret vow. Once he became a lawyer, I would be his wife. My dream would come true. But it was our secret. Duty was a concept that was a big part of George's life as well. In the salons of the upper class of New York, people making dutiful choices, sacrificing feelings over and over. George fought this. He tried to be free from his family, travel the world, drink, gamble, womanize, burn his life out of him. His family felt he'd settled down with age, and all the broken engagement and inability to work in the family business would end with the right woman. He would not pick the right woman. He picked me. Duty. The constraints of duty. George and I had at least this in common. I felt trapped by duty. It kept me contained, boxed in. I couldn't break free of it, or rather I didn't know how to. George knew the constraints of duty as well. He would try to escape it his entire life. Duty for George was like a mad dog running after him, biting at his heels. This ridiculous love triangle would continue over the next few years. George no longer wanted to be my Dana. He wanted me to be his wife. My answer, as before, was no each time he asked. But George had asked me to marry him many, many times. I had no interest. He asked again. I practiced the Kokyu. He asked again. I do not love him. He asked again. It was as if he was bargaining for a samurai sword, like the great ones my father formed, or elegant piece of jade, some trinket, some curio. He asked again. And then he asked no more. George finally retreated and said he was leaving Japan. But when he left, he gave me a stamped, self-addressed note I was to send to him if I ever changed my mind. It was a love letter in reverse. I did not know what to say, but something, my instinct did not let me tear it up. I kept it. I thought, how lovely of him to think to put stamps on it. He revealed to me that he might truly love me and take care of me. Such a small thing, but it was a detail of regard. He was a Morgan, flamboyant, but also practical. Of course, this is another part of the story that is sensationalized and romanticized in the papers. They said I mailed a letter to George because my heart had been broken, but it's not true. I wasn't heartbroken. Yet. And I didn't mail the letter, but someone did. George came back in January of 1902, expecting to marry me. I was trapped. I had no power to break off the relationship. I could not marry George. Kawakami-san only had a year and a half left of school, and then we could marry. I had to find a way to not marry George, but keep the relationship going with him at the same time. geisha is to leave and become married, a certain amount of money is needed to secure her release from the geisha house. George said he would pay whatever the cost. I told him the cost would be 40,000 yen. An outrageous sum. You must understand if someone to buy out the most sought after geisha, 10,000 yen would be an extraordinary amount. 40,000 yen was unheard of, and I was sure he would finally give up. But he didn't. He had his lawyer start to figure out a payment plan. No one had that much money to spend on hand. I said, no. It could only be done if the money was paid all at once. Going back and forth on the details of the financial agreement was the solution I found to keep the relationship going, but not marry George. And this sends George away from Japan again to figure out finances, or to leave for good. But back to Kawakami-san. Such an old story, I feel foolish even telling you about it. My deep love left me once he graduated. Eventually he married another. I had supported him and given him everything. Looking back now, I suppose I could not blame him for leaving. Everything with George had been so public. There was even a novel written about everything while it was happening. People already called me Morgan O-Yuki. And by this time, my relationship with Kawakami-san was no longer a secret. He did not like the notoriety. The college threatened to throw him out because of his association with me. But he graduated. He started to become distant. He wanted to belong to the upper class. When I visited him in Osaka after he had graduated, I brought up the topic of marriage. From the way he reacted to the mere mention of the subject, I could tell he no longer loved me. He offered to pay back all the money I had given him. But I didn't want it. I left. I felt my heart crack open like a Robinson. And felt sick. I had never had my heart break before. George came back to Japan again. I was not well. He worried about me when I was too pale with sadness, or had lost too much weight, or had the puffy trace of crying even a tea treatment, or the trumping of the bush warbler couldn't quite disguise. At times, I did not even recognize my face in a mirror. By the way, the secret of a geisha's beautiful complexion is the dry droppings of the bush warbler. If you are keeping your own bird, his diet should be high in fat, protein, and greens. I recommend the salt-free freshwater fish powder, furry caterpillars, and pulverized green leaves. You collect that droppings and spread them in the sun to dry completely. And then you grind them to a fine powder and store them in an airtight container. Or make sure they're completely dry. If they're moist, they will irritate the skin. My friend Kuniko would just call at the local bird shop for her supply, but I think it's much more elegant to have your own bird. I saw George in a new light now. I had rejected him so many times, and yet he always came back more loving than before. I knew what I had done to him was wrong, and I felt deep remorse. I looked at the choices in front of me. I could remain a geisha. My notoriety would still make me popular, at least for a while. But there was already an overwhelming amount of press about my courtship with George. No man would ever fall in love with me. I would not be able to marry. I would not ever escape the geisha life. Or I could marry George. He wanted me. He would take care of me. And I could live the geisha life. I chose George. We tried to keep our marriage private and out of the newspapers, and we had some success. I suppose the romance leading up to the marriage was the most interesting part to the Japanese. But the press was not finished with us. The Americans would write many things about our marriage. It was now 1904. For you who might be interested in this kind of thing, the very year the famous sculptor Isamu Noguchi was born to a Japanese father and American mother, the Russian-Japanese War began, and Puccini wrote Madame Butterfly. It was the Gilded Age of New York and the Meiji era of Japan. We were gazing in fascination at each other. Gilbert and Sullivan had composed the Mikado back in 1885, and people had been entranced with the romance and beauty of Japan for many years. Gilbert said that he was inspired to write it when he saw an old Japanese sword fall from the wall in his studio. It was time for me, my father's sword, to fall. American newspapers would report that George did indeed pay 40,000 yen to marry me. Did he? My family never changed their lifestyle. My sister remained a geisha. My brother was a barber. Well, there was a financial arrangement between my family and George, but I could never ask him for 40,000 yen. Not after everything I had done. We married on January 21st, 1904 in Yokohama. We both wore a traditional kimono, his black and mine white. The ceremony was attended by the American Consul General below, and the service was performed by Reverend E.S. Booth from the Yokohama Union Church. After the ceremony, we traveled back to Kyoto to be with my family. I was saying goodbye. I still remember during the final dinner with all of my family, it snowed. Kyoto is beautiful under the soft blanket join my family. And I recall the strange sensation it was to see my footprints remain in the fresh snow as I walked away from the only life I had ever known. When we left Japan, I cried. I cried. The United States of marriage and the United States of America. It was a sea for days, and a train, another train. Everything so big, everything so new. Western culture was not unknown to me, but it was completely different to see all firsthand. And then there was the family. The address was 6 East 40th Street, New York. Very simply, they did not like me. They did not know me. They did not like me. I was Japanese. I cannot say it was racial prejudice, I only felt it was foreign prejudice. I don't think it was any different on the part of my family. They just had to soften of monetary gain, and that power was not there for the Morgan dynasty. I brought nothing to them, except more scandalous, frivolous irresponsibility. The possibility of a mixed-race child carrying the Morgan name. We never did have children. George was furious. His beloved mother, Sarah Spencer Morgan, had died a few years ago, and his father's new wife, Sarah, was cold and considered me to be George's folly. These women had the same first name. Once George bitterly said that it was so convenient that the monograms did not have to be redone. Once again, he embarrassed the family. She considered me ugly and said she was ashamed of the marriage and not ashamed to say so. To the press, it was printed. Yes, the story does begin to sound like a fairy tale, what with wicked stepmothers and princes and Cinderella in the kitchen. And while it was true I did eat in the kitchen and not with the family, I actually did prefer it. Geisha did not consume milk and meat. It was considered inferior food and forbidden. It is very difficult to be surrounded by this food when one is trying to eat. And besides, George would always join me in the kitchen, and we enjoyed our quiet dinner together away from the rest of the family. His father, Mr. Morgan, was, well, civil, as was Junior's. At least his sister Carrie was kind. She had a weakness for her older brothers. In later years, Carrie and I became very close, corresponding wherever we were. George took me to visit Wall Street, the place where he was supposed to have followed in his family's footsteps, or as George put it, where he was supposed to have wasted his youth. And when we went, some gentlemen recognized me in kimono, loudly shouted and cheered, welcoming me and rooting for Japan. George said they were brokers and on the side of Japan in the war with Russia. He was charmed. It was attention. But soon the attention became all too much. People avoiding George and snubbing us. Strangers would stare at me. They'd stare at us. His friends asked him why he would marry someone like me. He simply replied, I love her. U-boat so he could show me the American Sea. On Rhode Island. It was the winter, and the reception was likewise frosty. He was happy I couldn't understand English because of some of the comments people would make. But disapproval and rejection are understandable in any language. He took me to Europe in May. In general, we were treated much better here than we were in America. But I didn't adjust to this new life very quickly. Everything was so different from what I was used to, and the food continued to be problematic. I became very thin. It became so tiring. George was the only person that I could speak to. No one else spoke Japanese. I became very homesick. So we went back to Japan to our house in Kyoto the next year. But the Russian war was still raging, and it was George's turn this time to suffer prejudice. Foreigners were not welcome in Japan. And because I had grown so thin, the Japanese thought I was being abused. It was intolerable for George. But he was not the only one to suffer prejudice. I had married a foreigner, and most people thought of that as betraying my country in this time of war. I had come here to escape stress, and instead, I found more. If we could not bend our worlds to fit us, we would find another world. We decided then to live in France. Springtime in Paris. It was beautiful. The cherry blossoms like home, but yet not like home. We lived on Champs-Élysées and then the Avenue du Bois. France was a haven, a place to land in between our different worlds. The Belle Epoque, the beautiful age. For more or less on and off, I will be here in France for the next 34 years. George provided me with everything that I could wish for. I had a tutor in French, and this would become our primary language together. We were both equally inept in fluency. Well, actually, we did learn to speak it quite well. I learned to play the cello. We traveled through Europe. Our life had fallen into the life of the wealthy expatriates, which is what I had become. I gave up my citizenship when I married a foreigner. On our walks in Nice, who would not be chuffed to see this American and Japanese couple strolling by the sea and the parasols and wearing the latest fashions, with two little dogs running ahead, straining at the leash. We made a lot of friends in France and were invited everywhere. We were happy. We were carefree. And I was in love with my husband. Actually, I really took to the Parisian fashion. I became quite good at sketching, so I'd mail drawings of my jewelry and diamonds to my friends and family in Japan. I loved my clothes and jewelry. I was known for my sense of style and could glide between the Western dress and Eastern kimono. I loved hats. And they set off my face like a flower. I wore long, elegant cloak and French perfume. George had loved it when I dressed for him, and he was very generous. He said I was like his perfect little doll. I did not mind this. It made me happy. I became more self-sufficient and did some traveling without George. On one of my trips back to France from Japan, I went by way of America to meet George, who was there to be with the family after his father's death. In January of 1912, the San Francisco Chronicle wrote, "The Japanese girl bride does not speak English, but she is thoroughly schooled in the French language, through which she conversed with her husband in a truly Parisian European fashion. May we? Mrs. Morgan favors the French fashion, and her gowns, hats, and extravagant jewels bring envy to the eyes of the set, which was once inclined to snap her when her first appearance in Newport society as the wife of young Morgan. Mrs. Morgan took great delight in her 2 dachshunds, which were permitted to romp around the decks, a privilege that is not often accorded the globetrotter. It was the first time Mrs. Morgan had her picture snapped by the newspaper photographers, but she didn't mind it a bit. She graciously submitted to pose. And after the cameras snapped, Frida dainty, thank you. Dainty? Well, I was not afraid to be bold in the fashions I wore. George would go back and forth to the United States for family and business reasons. I seldom went with him there, but I knew he would always have companionship if I didn't. He had old friends. He had women friends. George really did take care of me, but as I was able to manage more and more on my own, he didn't need to worry over me as much. And since I wasn't taking up as much of his attention, other women began to. I was trained to be a geisha. I knew the life of men. I knew the life of George. Well, George was always a wonder in every way. He died in Spain, in Seville, on July 9th, 1915, without me. His funeral was held at the American Cathedral in Paris, and then he was cremated. That was the Japanese way. And also George wanted to return to America, and this was the way I could take him back. I carried him across the sea back to his home. At night, on the deck of the ship, I would stand for hours looking out at the sea. My life and its journey. We had been together for 12 years. It was the second time I experienced heartbreak in my life. But this was different from the heartbreak of young love. It was a much deeper loss. I had grown accustomed to this life. I loved George. He made me a proper wife. He made my dream come true. And now, he was gone. I was alone. with the respect due a widow. It is never too late for forgiveness and acceptance. I decided to return to France, where I now felt at home. It had been the place where we were most our true selves, and I had made friends. I had begun to learn about the Catholic faith, and the deep connection to the church began to grow. I found a particular kinship with a Catholic nun, Saint Teresa. Teresa saw herself as the little flower because she was just like a simple wild flower in forests and fields, unnoticed by the greater population. This is how she understood herself, simple and hidden, but blooming where she was planted. My life had not been simple or hidden. I was noticed by the greater population, and my life had been greatly affected by that. She taught me now to find simplicity, and with that, I found a peace that I never had before. Some may find ironic that nuns and geisha would find a connection. Confusion of money and paper began. Finances were so much easier when George was alive. With his death, I had to become aware of a part of life that I never had to deal with before. I did inherit $600,000 upon his death. But his debts were substantial. He was a terrible gambler. I had to have a lot of help, a lot of determination, lawyers, advocacy, dedicated friends, and even then, I did not receive certain allowed sums until after my death. Happily, these amounts are left to the church and my family. But I did find a way to survive with what money I had. And while it was true I sold many of my clothes and jewelry, I didn't do it because I needed to. I didn't want to live as grandly as I once did. And besides, it felt good to let go of things from my past. It allowed me to be simple and hidden. Or as hidden as my life could be. But George, more than anything, I missed him. I suppose when you lose someone you love, the hardest part is to be left behind and not having the opportunity to create more memories together. I did find happiness and even companionship after he died. But George really was responsible for so much of what my life had become, of who I had become. I decided to return to Japan permanently in 1938, and I would spend the rest of my life there. Going home to Japan would complete the circle of my life. It was time to go back. I knew I had to go home. I thought going back to Japan would be peaceful, but when I came back, people with money-making schemes, investment ideas, philanthropy, and the press. I was news again. The Japanese papers called me the Japanese who doesn't speak Japanese. Well, I was gone for over 30 years. They all wanted to know why I had come back. I replied that, ただ横になって眠りたかっただけです。That I just wanted to lie down and sleep very well. And yet, I found myself having to adjust to a new country again. Japan has changed so much I sometimes wondered who we were, who I was. I was not French, I was not American, I was not Japanese. I spent my time with my family and the church. I was baptized finally at the age of 72. So my soul would find ways to heaven. I took Teresa as my name to honor Saint Teresa of Lisieux, the little flower. She wrote, "My Lord and my God, I have realized that whoever undertakes to do anything for the sake of earthly things or to earn the praise of others deceives himself. Today one thing pleases the world, tomorrow another. What is praised on one occasion is denounced on another." I was a citizen of no country. Now I'm a citizen of the heavens. I will die in 1963. My name Yuki means snowflake. I have thought back many times to the footprints I left in the snow in Kyoto and the last snowfall on the eve I left Japan. Looking out the window that night, I was not able to see very far through the snow. Just like my life, I did not know